So you've decided to venture into the short-term rental industry, and then literally 3 months later, you get hit with a cease and desist letter. It means your short-term rental business is now over. Or does it actually mean that? Today, we're going to be talking about exit strategies, specifically into the medium-term rental space. And if you are a short-term rental operator, a long-term rental operator, this is going to be some valuable information for you so you can still pivot out of any specific property that you want to. We're going to be diving into this a bit further. Welcome to the BiggerPockets channel. My name is Jesse Vasquez. I'm a real estate investor, an entrepreneur, a YouTuber, and all kinds of things that make me sound way cooler than what I actually truly am. And I'm excited today because we're going to be talking about a topic that is specific to what I've been doing for the last 8 years, which is medium-term rentals. And I like to call myself an expert in this space. But before we get started, let's hear a word from our sponsors. If you are a short or mid-term rental investor, you know how difficult it can be to qualify for a mortgage with conventional lenders. They ask you for W-2s, 24 months of financials, the breed of your dog, your 6th grade report card. HostFinancial.com is a lending program which is curated specifically for short-term rental operators and mid-term rental investors, and they are investors themselves, which is what I really love. And qualifying is a breeze with these 3 factors: the property's actual value, the projected income, and number 3, your actual FICO score, and of course, your liquidity. Visit hostfinancial.com for a free quote today. So I'm super excited to share this information with you guys because I see more and more folks that are in the short-term rental industry who are now being hit by restrictions. And when that happens, you have to pivot into another market or you could potentially lose your property. I'm going to take Dallas for an example. Dallas was just slammed along with New York City short-term rental regulations. There's a lot of new listings that have popped up in the last several months, and that is because a lot of those folks bought properties specifically to short-term rent, and then all of a sudden the city decides, hey, you can't do that anymore. I actually was in a market that was restricted, that we had short-term rental regulations hit, and if I didn't pivot into midterm rentals earlier, because I started midterm renting in 2015, if I didn't do that and those restrictions hit in the short-term rental space, which I also own short-term rentals, I would have been devastated. As I mentioned a bit ago, people are having to sell properties. They don't understand the medium-term rental space. And I think it's so important to learn how to pivot. If you're short-term renting now, it's super important that you start thinking about the medium-term rental space. In fact, I would encourage you during down season to really start focusing on how you can pivot into the medium-term rental space. As you guys know, in the short-term rental space, you have ups and downs, peaks and valleys. In the investment world, it's just part of what we do. But during slow season, if you pivot into the medium-term rental space, you can have your income actually pretty solid all the way through. So short-term rental operators, you definitely want to start thinking about the medium-term rental space. It is still way, way early, and it is important to jump in or at least dip your toe in right now. Number 2, I've heard and talked to so many real estate investors on a regular basis. Fix and flippers are running into a massive situation right now. They bought property 6 months ago. They're refining out of hard money loans. In fact, they are either able to sell the property, refinance out, but either way, they're going to lose money. These fix and flippers that typically did this for years are now flipping into holding some properties that are going to cash flow. So medium-term rentals, as I talked about before, allow you to have an easy pivot where you can hold the property, but you can also cash flow. And the great thing about this is that you don't have to deal with the turnovers that come along with the short-term rental space. In fact, if you do this the right way and you're able to get, let's say, 4 individuals staying at your property, we're going to use travel nurses for this instance, and they stay for 3 months at a time, which most typical travel nurses stay for 90 days. That would mean you only have 4 guests a year that are staying for 90 days at a time. That means less headaches, less turnovers. And for fix and flippers that aren't necessarily used to the long-term rental game, this is an easier way to get into this space by still being able to 2x your income, which again, bringing cash flow in right now for a fix and flipper or anybody that owns property is the most important. So that's why you're seeing these folks that are starting to think about different exit strategies. And I feel it's super, super important to do that because right now is a time to be able to pivot. Number 3, let's talk about long-term rentals. Right now, it's super difficult to find a 1% rule where you buy a property, let's say it's $100,000, you're able to rent it for $1,000. Those are more difficult to find. With the rates being as high as they are, cash flow and even breaking even sometimes doesn't even make sense. I'm in California and I can tell you guys that I can't buy a property that will necessarily work as a long-term rental if I'm not in the negative. So one of the great things about the long-term rental space is that long-term rentals are actually pretty easy to pivot into the medium-term rental space. The same way that you screen folks, the same way that you're going to do background checks, that you're collecting leases, those are the exact same things that you're going to do in the medium-term rental space. But the cool thing, as I mentioned before, is that these folks are having less turnover, they're less headaches, and they're more like long-term rental tenants. In fact, most people, like I'm going to go ahead and use travel nurses again. They stay at the property, they've lived there. It's not like the short-term rental industry where people are complaining about iPhone cords, a light being out. In fact, a lot of the folks that I've had stay with me in my properties will actually fix those things on their own and not even mention to me about them. So as a long-term rental investor, it's super important to think about exit strategies. And this is one of the exit strategies that can also bring more income in, that can help you build a business that is going to be able to be sustainable, which will allow you to have more cash flow. And I think, again, a lot of the headaches that are typically in the nuances of dealing with the short-term rental industry, a lot of us in the medium-term space don't have to deal with those because, again, these folks are staying, they're living in the property. So I believe a long-term rental transition to the medium-term rental space is a lot easier than most think. So many people think that the medium-term rental space, you're gonna have squatters that are staying in your property. And I can't tell you guys how far from the truth that is. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen to people, because it does, but I've been operating medium-term rentals for over 8 years. Most of these folks that are staying at the property are professionals. They are business travelers, they're travel medical professionals, they're families that are looking to relocate because they've lost their property due to a fire, flood, or some kind of catastrophic event. We want to make sure we do background checks. We want to check what the agencies they're coming to work for. We want to make sure that we're screening these tenants in the right way. But I can tell you now that I haven't had a squatter stay at my property, and I've been doing this for quite some time. And I can tell you that it is a lot less headaches for me specifically than I even feel with some long-term rental tenants. So it's definitely an exit strategy that is helpful. But again, I wouldn't be worried about squatters as long as you're doing your due diligence and making sure that those folks are there to work. That's been my situation over the last 8 years, which I feel pretty comfortable that we're doing the correct background checks and these folks are just here to work and then they're off to another assignment somewhere else. Don't be worried, just do your due diligence. So I want to thank you guys all for hanging out with me today at BiggerPockets channel. And again, my name is Jesse Vasquez. You guys can find me over on Instagram at @TheRealJesseVasquez or over on YouTube at Jesse Vasquez as well. And I'm extremely excited to be hanging out with you guys today, but I really want to make sure that you guys are able to hear from our sponsors, Host Financial, which I happen to like very much. They're one of the companies that I've worked with in the past, and they're definitely an alternative to traditional lending. So I definitely think you should check them out. And I appreciate you guys for hanging out with us. We'll see you in the next one. Take care, everybody.